The slowest warship in the relief column moved like it had nowhere it needed to be, and every other captain in the formation found that hilarious. Quartermaster pilot Esh Taluni of the Vaccine Accord watched the readout on her bridge and laughed out loud, a thin clicking sound that her species made when something was beneath worry. The human ship was called the Patient Anvil, and it crawled at 1/10 of the speed of every escort around it. Esh had served the Accord for 40 of her years. She had seen fast ships and faster ships, raiders that could cross a planet's shadow before a sensor finished blinking. She had never seen a warship choose to be slow. It made no sense. In her culture, in the culture of the whole Bright Reach, speed was life. The faster you were, the harder you were to kill. Her ship, the Quill of Vaccine, sat near the front of the column, lean and bright, and built to dance. Around her, 240 Accord vessels held escort formation over a freighter train hauling grain and water to 3 starving colonies on the rim. The grain ships were slow too, but they were freighters. They were supposed to be slow. The Patient Anvil was a warship. A warship that could not keep up was, to Esh's eyes, a contradiction with a hull. To understand why the whole column found the Patient Anvil so funny, an observer would first have to understand the Bright Reach. The Reach was a wide spiral arm of 200 inhabited systems, and every species in it shared one religion, even the ones that shared nothing else. They worshipped acceleration. Their poetry was about flight. Their gods were the swift. Their children were named for the speed of light and the wind between stars, and their warships were built thin and bright and hollow, because every gram of armor was a gram that slowed you down, and a ship that could be caught was already dead. For 10,000 years, the cleverest engineers of the Reach had asked the same question every morning when they woke. How do we go faster? No one had ever asked a different question. No one had ever needed to. So when the humans came, 4 generations ago, drifting in from the cold edge of the arm in ships that crawled, the Reach had not known what to make of them. The humans built thick. The humans built slow. The humans put armor where speed should be and called it a fair trade, and the Reach had laughed at them the way Esh was laughing now, and had gone on laughing for 4 generations, because nothing the humans did made any sense to a people who had spent 10,000 years learning the single lesson that speed was life. The humans never argued the point. That was the strange part. They just kept building slow ships, and kept showing up where the fighting was, and kept being there, quietly, at the end, when the fast ships were gone. Esh knew none of this history in any depth. She knew the human ship was slow and that slow was funny. She opened a private channel to her wing partner, a captain named Drovo who flew the Quill's sister ship. Look at it, Esh said. The humans sent us a fortress that walks. We will reach the rim, unload the grain, and walk home again before that thing clears the inner buoys. Drovo's reply crackled with the same dry humor. Maybe it is a decoy. Maybe the real human warship is hiding somewhere, fast and small, and this slab is meant to make us feel safe. It does not make me feel safe, Esh said. It makes me feel embarrassed. The Reavers will see us escorting a cripple and think we are a joke. That was the thing that gnawed at her. The column was not traveling through empty space. It was crossing the thin edge of territory claimed by the Coran Reavers, and the Reavers did not care about treaties or charters or starving colonies. They cared about cargo, and they cared about speed, and they had more ships than anyone could count. The other escort captains had taken up the joke and run with it across the whole 11 days of the journey out. They had given the Patient Anvil names: the Slug, the Tombstone, the Gray Brick. One captain near the middle of the column, a young hothead named Velo who flew a raider so fast it could barely be turned, had started a running wager on the open net about how far behind the column the human ship would be by the time they reached the rim, and the numbers in the wager grew more insulting every day. A light hour, a light day, a light year. Velo had declared, to general clicking laughter, that the Patient Anvil was less a warship than a slow-moving monument to the human inability to understand basic physics. Esh had laughed at Velo's jokes. She was honest enough, later, to admit that. She had not started the mockery, but she had warmed her hands at its fire like everyone else. Because there is a particular comfort in a fleet agreeing that one ship among them is the weak one. It makes the rest feel strong. It makes the dark feel survivable. If the slow gray ship was the joke, Then the fast, bright ships were the heroes, and heroes do not die on grain runs. Esh had grown up on stories of the Reavers. Every child of the Bright Reach had. They were not an empire in the way the Accord was an empire, with senates and tax forms and polite disagreements. They were a tide. They bred fast, built fast, and moved fast, and when they swarmed a target, they did it with such overwhelming numbers that resistance was less a battle than a question of how long the screaming lasted. A single Reaver ship was small and ugly, and barely a threat. 10,000 of them arriving at once was the end of whatever they arrived at. The standing wisdom of the Reach was simple. You did not fight the Reavers. You outran them. You built engines that could leave their swarm choking on empty vacuum, and you prayed your cargo was not worth the chase. Which was exactly why no one in the column could understand the patient anvil. "Have you read its file?" Drovo asked. "There is barely a file," Esh said. 312 meters. Crew of 900. Top sustained acceleration that would shame a mining barge. Armament listed only as, and I am reading this exactly, primary projector array, undisclosed. That is the whole entry, undisclosed. The humans gave us a warship and would not even tell us what it shoots. Maybe it shoots disappointment, Drovo said. Maybe that is the secret weapon. It arrives so slowly the enemy dies of old age. Esh clicked again, amused despite herself. But underneath the laughter she felt something she did not like, a small, cold pressure she could not name. She had flown beside many Allied ships in her career. Allied ships postured. They broadcast their strength, flashed their weapon ports, ran their reactors loud, so everyone nearby could feel how dangerous they were. It was rude, and it was normal, and she understood it. The patient anvil did none of that. It ran dark and quiet and patient, exactly as its name promised. Its reactor signature was a low, even hum that never spiked. Its weapon ports, if it had any, stayed sealed. It did not posture. It did not boast. It simply moved, slow and steady, at the back of the column, and let 240 faster ships flit around it like insects around a stone. A stone did not care about insects. The thought arrived in Esh's mind unbidden, and she pushed it away. She did not like it. It had the wrong shape. It implied that the slow ship was not failing to keep up at all, but rather declining to, the way a mountain declines to move out of the way of weather, and that was not a thought a daughter of the Bright Reach was equipped to hold for very long. So she let it go, and she went back to watching the readout, and she told herself the cold pressure in her chest was nothing more than nerves about the Reaver territory ahead. She would remember that moment for the rest of her life. The moment she had felt the truth brush past her, cold and certain, and had chosen the comfortable lie instead, because the comfortable lie let her keep laughing. Almost everyone in the column made the same choice that day. 240 captains, each one feeling some version of that cold pressure, each one pushing it away. Only one ship in the formation was not laughing, and it was the slow gray one, and it was not laughing because it already knew exactly how the day was going to end. On the human ship, in a sensor pit lined with worn gray panels, a young crew member named Orin Vale sat at his station and listened to the chatter the Accord ships did not know he could hear. He was 19 years old by the count of his birth world, the youngest rated sensor operator aboard the patient Anvil, and he had been listening to the escort fleet mock his ship for 3 days. He did not mind. His chief, a heavy-set woman named Petra Holland who ran the sensor deck like a quiet country, had told him on his first day aboard that being underestimated was the most valuable cargo a warship could carry, and that the Anvil carried more of it than any ship in the fleet. "Let them laugh," Holland had said. "Laughing crews do not watch the slow ship. They watch each other, and the slow ship watches everything." Orin had not fully understood that then. He was beginning to understand it now. For 3 days he had mapped the entire column, every escort, every freighter, every blind spot in their overlapping sensor cones, while the escorts treated the Anvil as furniture. He knew where each Accord ship was weak. He knew the column had a hole in its rear coverage that no one had noticed because no one expected the threat to come from behind a ship that could not run. He flagged it, quietly, and sent it up to the bridge. He did not expect anyone to act on it. The captain of the patient Anvil, a gray and unhurried man named Captain Doss Mercer, acted on everything. Orin had asked Petra Holland on his second day aboard why a warship as dangerous as the Anvil bothered to crawl, He had read the ship's classification before he transferred in. He knew, in a general way, what the projector in the spine could do, even if the specifics were kept off every public file in the galaxy. He could not understand why a ship that could do that to an enemy fleet would also choose to be the slowest, most mockable vessel in any formation it joined. Holland had not answered him with words at first. She had taken him down a long companionway to a sealed viewport that looked into the projector chamber, the great silent third of the ship that no public document would describe, and she had let him stand there and feel the size of it, the way it filled the dark like a held breath. Then she had told him the only thing she ever told new crew about the matter. "A ship like this only works if nobody knows it is a ship like this," she had said. "The day the galaxy understands what the anvil really is, the anvil stops being able to do its job. Fast ships flee the moment they fear you. We do not want them to flee. We want them to come close, and come fast, and come arrogant, because arrogance is the only door this weapon cannot open by force. So we crawl. We let them laugh. We carry the most valuable cargo a warship can carry, Orin, and the cargo is their contempt. Guard it. Never spend it early. And when the day comes that you have to spend it all at once, on the worst enemy you will ever face, and never let one of them live to warn the next." Orin had not fully understood that either. He was 19. He understood it now better than he had 2 days ago, and in a little under 11 minutes, he was going to understand it completely. Captain Doss Mercer read the cadet's note twice, then walked it to the navigation station himself instead of forwarding it, because he believed a thing held in the hand was taken more seriously than a thing that arrived on a screen. "The boy is right," he told his navigator, an old spacer named Lynn Auber, who had served on the anvil longer than anyone alive. "Our column has its back open. Shift us 4 degrees and drop us behind the freight train. If anything comes from the dark side, it comes through us first." Auber frowned at the order, not because it was wrong, but because it would make the anvil even slower relative to the column, and the Accord ships would notice, and the Accord ships would laugh harder. "They already think we are a joke, Captain. Now they will think we are a frightened joke, hiding behind the grain." "Let them," Mercer said. He had a way of saying those 2 words that ended conversations. A frightened ship and a patient ship look the same from the front. The difference only matters once. The patient anvil swung its blunt nose 4 degrees and settled into the gap behind the freighters, and on the bridge of the Quill of Vaccine, Quartermaster Pilot Esh Toloon watched it happen and could not stop herself from broadcasting a remark to the whole escort net. "The fortress has found a hiding place," she said, light and cruel. "Behind the bread." Laughter rolled across 240 ships. It was the kind of laughter that bonds a fleet, the laughter of allies who have decided someone among them is the weak link and feel safer for naming it. Esh felt the warmth of it. She did not feel the shame underneath, not yet. That would come later, and it would last the rest of her life. She did not know that the joke would be the last one she ever told at the anvil's expense, or that she would spend years afterward wishing she could take it back, not because it was cruel, but because it was wrong. And being wrong in front of 9,000 colonists, who would later owe their lives to the ship she had mocked, was a weight she had not yet learned to carry. What none of the Accord captains knew was that the human ship's communications officer had translated every word of their mockery and piped it, dry and uninflected, into the patient anvil's mess hall, where the off-duty crew listened while they ate. The humans did not laugh back. That was what an observer would have found strange, if any observer had been aboard to see it. 900 human beings listened to an allied fleet call their ship a coward and a cripple and a hiding fortress, and they ate their food in calm silence, and a few of them smiled small private smiles, and not one of them said a word in anger. They had heard it all before. The patient anvil was 41 years old. It had been mocked at 6 prior engagements by 6 prior allies, and at the end of each engagement the mockery had stopped, abruptly, in the same way a sound stops when a door closes. There was a kind of tradition aboard the anvil about it. The older crew, the ones who had served through 3 or 4 of those engagements, would keep a quiet tally of the best insults each new ally invented, and at the end of a deployment, they would gather in the mess and read the tally aloud, and award a small carved token to whoever had logged the cruelest one. The slug had made the list that morning, The gray brick had made it the day before. A weapons technician named Hale, who had served 18 years aboard and lost most of his hearing to the projector's hum, kept the master tally in a worn paper book, and he turned to a fresh page that morning and wrote, in careful block letters, a slow-moving monument to the human inability to understand basic physics, and underlined it twice, and said to the table, with great satisfaction, "Now that one is going to be hard to beat." The crew did not resent the mockery, because they had long ago stopped hearing it as mockery. To them, it was a sound the enemy made before dying, the way some prey animals freeze and call out right before the predator strikes, and a human warship that had learned to find comfort in the sound of being underestimated was a very dangerous thing to underestimate. They ate their food, they cleaned their stations, they ran their drills, and they waited, with the patience the ship was named for the laughter to stop the way it always stopped. Down in the sensor pit, Orrin Vale was not listening to the mess hall. He was watching a smear at the edge of his long-range plot that he did not like. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. It was a faint thermal gradient on the dark side of the column, the side facing away from the local star, where the reavers liked to come from, because the cold made them hard to see. Orrin had been trained to distrust nothing. He had been trained that nothing, in deep space, was the most dangerous reading on the board, because real emptiness had a texture, and this smear did not have it. This smear was too even. Something was making it even. He leaned closer. He filtered out the star, the freighters, the escort wash, the reactor bleed of his own ship. He stacked 4 minutes of returns on top of each other and watched the smear resolve, very slightly, into a faint repeating pattern, the kind of pattern you only got from many small objects moving in loose unison. His hands went cold. "Chief," he said. His voice did not shake. Petra Holland had drilled that out of him on the first day. A sensor operator who lets his voice shake gives the bridge a reason to doubt the reading. "Chief, I have a population on the dark side. Distributed. Small individual returns. A lot of them." Holland was at his shoulder in 3 seconds. She did not ask if he was sure. She looked at the stacked returns, and the smear, and the texture that was too even, and her face did the thing Orrin had learned to read as the worst thing it could do, which was nothing at all. "Count them," she said quietly. "I cannot get a clean count. They are too close together and too cold. But the envelope." He ran the math the way she had taught him, area and density, and the spacing the pattern implied. The number that came out the other side was so large he checked it 3 times before he said it. "The envelope supports somewhere between 11 and 14,000 hulls, Chief. Reaver-class returns, closing on the column from the dark." Petra Holland straightened up. For one moment, one single moment, the worry showed on her face, and then it folded away, because she had a job, and the job did not have room for it. 12,000, she said. "We will say 12,000 to the captain, and let him round up if he wants to. Send it now. Flag it red. And Orrin." She put one hand on his shoulder, heavy and steady. "Good eyes. You just bought us 11 minutes. On this ship, 11 minutes is a lifetime." The alert reached Captain Mercer on the bridge 19 seconds later. He read it standing up, and he did not sit down, and he did not raise his voice. "All stations," he said into the ship-wide channel, in the tone of a man asking for a second cup of something warm. "We have company. Roughly 12,000 Corin Reaver hulls, inbound from the dark side, 11 minutes out. You all know the work. Let us do the work." That was the entire speech. There was no rousing call to courage, no invocation of home, no promise that they would all see the sun again. The crew of the Patient Anvil did not need any of that. They had heard the speech that mattered 41 years ago when the ship was launched, and it had never stopped being true, and Mercer saw no reason to repeat it. Across the ship, 900 people stood up from whatever they had been doing and went to their stations, and they did it without hurry, because hurry was a thing fast ships did, and the Anvil was not a fast ship. In the projector chamber, the technicians who would feed the weapon pulled on their padded harnesses and their ear protection, and old Hale closed his paper book of insults and slid it into a sealed locker, because the page would still be there after the engagement, and there might be a new entry to add, and a man liked to have something to look forward to. In the mess hall, the cooks banked the ovens and stowed the trays, and one of them said, to no one in particular, 12,000. That is a respectable number. We have not had a respectable number in a while. And the others nodded, the way people nod at weather. Mercer turned to Lynn Auber and said the thing he had been waiting 3 days to say. "Wake the projector," he said. "All the way. We are going to need the floor." Auber's old hands moved across the board with a speed that had nothing to do with the ship's acceleration. Deep in the spine of the patient anvil, in a chamber that took up almost a third of the hull's length, something enormous and silent began to stir, drawing power off the reactor in a long, smooth ramp that never spiked, because the entire ship had been designed around the principle that the most dangerous machines are the quiet ones. Meanwhile, on the quill of Vaccine, the same contact had reached Esh Talun, and she was no longer laughing. 12,000, she repeated, staring at the readout as if she could make it smaller by glaring. 12,000 reavers, on a grain run. The reavers did not usually field 12,000 for grain. Grain was not worth that. Esh understood, with the cold clarity of someone who has just learned the rules changed when they were not looking, that the reavers had not come for the grain at all. They had come because a slow, fat column of Allied ships was the easiest meal the Dark had offered them in a generation, and 12,000 hulls swarming all at once would erase the entire escort before a single distress signal cleared the system. The escort commander, an admiral named Uvel, aboard the flagship Radiance of Vaccine, came onto the net with the steady voice of someone trying very hard to be steady. "All escorts. This is Fleet Command," Uvel said. "We cannot outrun a swarm that has already closed to 11 minutes. We will form a defensive sphere around the freighters and hold until the colonies can scramble a rescue. Every ship to assigned position. Fight in pairs. Protect the bread. The Bright Reach is counting on this grain." It was a brave order. It was also, Esh knew, a death order. 240 Accord ships, fast and lean, and lightly armed because speed was their armor, could not hold a defensive sphere against 12,000 reaver hulls. They would account for hundreds of the enemy before they died. They would die anyway. Mathematics did not care about bravery. She found, to her own surprise, that the first ship she thought of was not her own. It was the slow one, the fortress that walked, the hiding joke behind the bread. She opened a channel to it. She had never spoken to it directly in 3 days. None of them had. You did not waste breath on furniture. "Patient Anvil," she said, "this is the quill of Vaccine. You cannot run. You are slow. I am sorry for what we said. Fall into the sphere and we will try to screen you for as long as we—" "Quill of Vaccine," a calm human voice answered, cutting her off without heat. It was the navigator, Lynn Auber, who had been told by his captain to handle Allied chatter so the bridge could think. "Thank you for the offer. Do not screen us. Get your ships behind us instead." Esh blinked. "Behind you? You are 300 meters of monitor, with one undisclosed gun. You cannot screen 240 ships. You cannot screen yourself." "We are aware of our dimensions," Auber said, in the patient tone of a man who had given this exact explanation many times. "Get behind us anyway, all of you. And whatever you see in the next 10 minutes, do not fire until we tell you. Your weapons will only be in the way." The line clicked off. Esh stared at it. "In the way," Drovo repeated on the private channel, half offended, half stunned. "Our weapons will be in the way. The walking fortress is going to teach the whole fleet how to shoot." Esh did not answer. She was watching the patient anvil on her plot, and the patient anvil had begun to do something she had no word for. It had stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. It had killed its forward acceleration entirely, and pivoted its blunt prow to face the dark side, the side the swarm was coming from, and it sat there, motionless, a 300-meter slab of gray metal hanging dead in space, with 12,000 killers bearing down on it. To every instinct Esh had ever trusted, it was the single most suicidal thing she had ever watched a captain do. Speed was life. A motionless ship was a dead ship. The patient anvil had just chosen to become the most stationary, most undefended, most obviously doomed target in the entire column. And then her sensor officer made a small choking sound and said, "Pilot, the slow ship, its reactor, look at its reactor." Eshiash looked. For 3 days, the patient anvil's reactor had been a flat, quiet hum, the lowest signature in the column, so low that some of the escorts had joked it was barely powered at all. Now the hum was changing, not spiking. The humans did not seem to know how to spike. It was rising, smooth and bottomless, and without any visible ceiling, climbing through power levels that should have torn the hull apart, and still climbing, in a long, even ramp that simply would not stop. The number on Esh's board passed the output of her entire escort fleet combined, then it passed it again, then it kept going. "What is that ship?" her sensor officer whispered. "What is that ship really?" Esh Talun did not know. But she was beginning, with a feeling very much like the cold she had felt the first time she laughed at it, to understand that she had spent 3 days mocking something she had never actually looked at. On the dark side, the swarm arrived. It did not arrive the way a fleet arrives. A fleet has a shape. The Koran Reavers had no shape. They came as a tide of small, ugly hulls, each one barely 40 meters, each one armed with a single forward ram lance, and a crew that had never been taught to fear anything. And there were so many of them that on Oren Vale's sensor plot, they did not appear as individual contacts at all. They appeared as weather, a front, a wall of cold metal rolling across the dark, 12,000 strong and accelerating, with the relief column laid out before it like a meal on a long table. The Reavers did not hail. They did not demand surrender. They did not slow. The whole philosophy of the swarm was that nothing could stand in front of it, so why would it ever slow down? It simply poured toward the column at full burn, every hull racing every other hull for the honor of the first kill, and at the front of that wall the fastest Reavers were already opening their ram lances and choosing their targets among the helpless freighters. In the sensor pit of the patient anvil, Oren Vale watched the wall of weather fill his screen and felt his heart trying to climb out of his chest, and he held his voice perfectly steady because Petra Holland was standing beside him, and Petra Holland was not afraid. 12,000 and rising, Oren reported. Lead elements at full burn. Time to contact with the freighters, 90 seconds. Forget the freighters, Holland said. Time to contact with us. Oren checked. The patient anvil sat directly between the dark side and the column, the motionless ship, the first thing the wall would hit. 40 seconds, Chief, he said. We are the front of the table. Petra Holland smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting 3 days, 3 days of being called furniture, 3 days of being the bread's hiding place, 3 days of letting an entire Allied fleet decide her ship was a joke. Good, she said. Tell the captain the floor is set. Captain Doss Mercer stood in the center of his bridge, with his hands folded behind his back, and watched the wall of the swarm come on, and he did not give the order to fire, because the patient anvil did not fire in the way other ships fired. It was a common mistake, the human navigator Lynn Auber had once explained to a baffled Allied officer, to think of the anvil as a ship with a gun. The anvil was not a ship with a gun. The anvil was a gun with just enough ship attached to aim it. The chamber that filled a third of its hull was not a weapon bay. It was the weapon, and the rest of the vessel, the reactor, the armor, the 900 souls aboard, existed to feed it, point it, and survive being near it when it spoke. The projector did not throw a beam. It did not throw a shell. What it threw was a fold in the floor of space itself, a sustained gravitational shear, a moving wall of warped distance that the human engineers who had built it called, with the grim plainness humans applied to terrible things, the floor. When the floor came up, anything caught above it found that the rules of motion had quietly changed, and the faster a thing was moving when the rules changed, the worse the change treated it. This was the secret the whole Bright Reach had never understood. The Reavers worshipped speed. The Accord worshipped speed. Every culture in this corner of the galaxy had built its entire survival around going faster, because for 10,000 years, faster had been the only thing that kept anyone alive. And the humans had looked at all of that, at this whole galaxy of creatures fleeing as fast as their engines could carry them, and they had built a weapon that turned speed into a weakness. The faster you charged the patient anvil, the more momentum it had to use against you. The swarm that no one could outrun was about to learn that no one had ever needed to outrun it. Someone only needed to stand still and wait for it to arrive too fast to stop. There was a thing the human engineers said about the floor, a saying that had passed down through 41 years of the anvil's crew, and it went like this. The floor does not kill the enemy kills the enemy. The floor only changes the rules so that the enemy's own greatest strength becomes the instrument. It was a humble way to describe a weapon that could fold a moon, And it was also, the crew believed, the only honest way. The anvil did not destroy the Reavers. The Reavers, by being exactly what 10,000 years had made them, destroyed themselves the instant the floor gave them the chance. All the ship had to do was be patient enough to wait for the chance, and brave enough to stand still while it came. That was the part no one outside the ship ever believed. Standing still. To a galaxy that worshipped speed, standing still in front of a charging swarm was not bravery, it was madness. It was suicide. It was a thing only a creature too stupid to flee would do. The humans had spent 4 generations being told they were too stupid to flee. They had learned to wear the insult like armor, because the insult was the whole reason the trick worked. You could only stand still and win if the enemy was certain that standing still meant losing. The moment the enemy doubted it, the trick was gone. So the anvil guarded the doubt of its enemies the way other ships guarded their reactors, and it had never once let an enemy live long enough to doubt. Floor at full charge, Auber reported. Aperture wide. Captain, the lead wave is inside the cone. Mercer let 3 more seconds pass. He wanted as many of them inside the cone as the geometry would give him. He watched the count tick upward on the side of his vision, the number of Reaver hulls that had crossed into the volume of space the projector could reshape, and when the number was as large as patience could make it, he spoke. "Raise the floor," he said. The patient anvil did not recoil, it did not flash. The only sign on the human bridge that the most powerful weapon in the system had just discharged was a deep, bone-level hum that every crew member felt in their teeth, and a long, smooth dip in the reactor signature as a third of the ship's mass energy poured out through the projector and into the dark. On the dark side, in the volume where 11,000 Corran Reavers were charging at full burn, space tilted. There is no good way to describe what it looked like, and the Accord ships watching from behind the anvil would argue about it for the rest of their lives. The nearest words were these. A vast invisible slope appeared across the path of the swarm, a shear in the floor of reality, and every Reaver hull that had been racing forward at full acceleration suddenly found that forward was now also down, steeply, and that the speed they had been so proud of was now the precise measure of how hard they would be flung. The lead wave did not slow. It could not slow. It hit the shear at full burn, and the shear took all that beautiful momentum and folded it sideways, and 4,000 small, ugly hulls were wrenched off their courses in a single heartbeat, tumbling, crushing, grinding into one another in a cascade that spread backward through the swarm, faster than the swarm could react. The Reavers behind the lead wave did the only thing their entire culture had ever taught them to do. They went faster. They saw the chaos ahead, and they accelerated to punch through it, because in 10,000 years of warfare, that had always been the answer. Speed was always the answer, and they poured more hulls into the shear at higher and higher velocities, and the floor accepted every one of them and turned every gram of their speed against them. Aboard the Quill of Vaccine, Talun's sensor officer was trying to narrate the engagement to the bridge and failing, because his vocabulary had run out. "They are flying into it," he kept saying. "Pilot, they keep flying into it. They can see the front wave dying. The whole front of the swarm is wreckage, and the ones behind are accelerating into the wreckage. Why would they do that? Why would anything do that?" And watching, found that she could answer him, because she had grown up in the same religion the Reavers had. Because to them, slowing down is the only thing that has ever killed anyone, she said quietly. Every fight they have ever won, they won by going faster. Every fight they have ever lost, they lost because someone caught them. Their whole world has exactly one lever, and the lever is speed. And when the lever stops working, they do not know how to do anything except pull it harder. We are the same. If we were in their place, we would do the same thing. We would die pulling the lever. She felt sick. The humans built a wall that only kills things that pull the lever. They did not build it for the Reavers. They built it for everyone who thinks like us. That was the moment Talun began, truly, to be afraid of her allies, and to be glad past all measure that they were her allies. It was not a battle. Talune would have given anything to call it a battle, because a battle was something she understood. This was something else. This was a tide breaking itself on a stone that had decided exactly when and where to exist. The swarm that could not be outrun was destroying itself on its own momentum, and the slow ship that could not keep up had not moved a single meter to do it. "Floor holding," Auber reported, his voice as level as if he were reading a maintenance log. "Sustained shear, reactor draw nominal. They are still coming, Captain. They are still accelerating into it." "Of course they are," Mercer said softly. He almost sounded sorry. "It is the only thing they know how to do. Hold the floor. Let them teach themselves." Then the swarm tried something new, and on the human bridge, it was the only moment of the engagement that made Doss Mercer lift his chin. A wedge of perhaps 2,000 Reaver hulls broke off from the main body and swung wide, far out around the edge of the shear, trying to come at the column from an angle the floor was not facing. It was the first intelligent thing the swarm had done. Somewhere in that tide of 40-meter killers, there was a mind, or many minds, that had finally noticed the wall did not point everywhere at once, and had decided to go around it. For a moment, it looked clever. For a moment, the wide wedge had a clean line straight to the soft freighters, and Eshtalune, watching, felt her stomach drop, because she understood at last that the floor had an edge, and an enemy that found the edge could pour through it. But the humans had built the anvil to be underestimated, and an enemy that underestimates you assumes your weapon is as simple as it looks. The floor was not a wall. The floor was a thing the projector could shape, and shape quickly, in the hands of a navigator who had spent 19 years learning its temper. "They found the edge," Auber said, not alarmed, simply reporting. 2,000, swinging wide. "Then move the edge," Mercer said. Auber's hands moved, and the floor did not break or flicker. It bent. The whole vast shear pivoted on the anvil like a door swinging on a hinge, and the wide wedge of 2,000 Reavers, committed at full burn to an angle that had been open a half-second before, flew into the swinging edge of the floor at the exact moment it arrived to meet them. They had aimed for the gap. The gap had moved to find them, and because they were Reavers, because they were fast, because they had committed everything to the angle, not one of them could pull up in time, and the swinging floor took the whole clever wedge and folded it as thoroughly as it had folded the stupid ones. "The edge is wherever the human wants it," Esh said aloud, to her stunned bridge. "It is not a wall they are flying into. It is a door, and the door opens toward whoever runs at it. There is no angle. There is no flank. There is no clever way to die against that ship. There is only fast, and fast is the one thing it eats." Her sensor officer had stopped trying to narrate. He simply sat and watched, the way you watch weather, the way you watch a thing too large to argue with. 2,000 more contacts winked out of his plot, and he made a small sound, and he did not have a word for the sound either. In the sensor pit, Oren Vale watched the contact count do something he had never seen a contact count do. It was supposed to climb when an enemy fleet arrived and fall when you killed them. Instead, it was doing both at once, climbing as fresh Reaver hulls poured into the system from the dark, and falling as the floor ground the front of the swarm into wreckage, and the falling was faster than the climbing, much faster, and Oren realized he was watching the largest swarm the Reavers had fielded in a generation eat itself from the front. "Chief," he said, "we have put down 4,000, no, 5,000, in 90 seconds. We have not fired a shot. We have not touched them. They are flying into the floor, and the floor is—" He stopped. He did not have a word for what the floor was doing. "Chief, they keep coming. Why do they keep coming?" Petra Holland looked at the boy, at his white knuckles and his steady voice, and she gave him the truest answer she had. "Because they have never lost," she said. "Not once. 12,000 hulls, and not one of them has ever been in a fight they could not win by going faster. They do not believe the floor is real. They think it is a trick. They think if they just commit harder, push faster, throw more of themselves at it, it will break. Because everything has always broken. They will keep coming until there is no one left to come, because they cannot imagine a galaxy where speed is not enough." She straightened. "Humans imagined it. That is the whole difference, Oren. We are the species that asked what beats speed. Everybody else just ran. Behind the anvil, the Accord fleet held its fire, because the humans had told them to, and because not one Accord weapon could have done anything but get in the way. 240 captains who had spent 3 days laughing now sat in stunned silence and watched a slab of gray metal that could barely outrun a barge dismantle the terror of the Bright Reach without moving and without firing a single conventional shot. Tolune found her sensor officer staring at her. "Pilot," he said. Should we do something? We are just watching. We are an escort fleet and we are watching." "Yes," Esh said. Her throat was dry. "We are watching. That is the order. That is the kindest order anyone has ever given us." She gestured at the plot, at the shear, at the 7,000 Reaver hulls now grinding themselves into dust against a wall they refuse to believe in. "If we fire into that, we change the geometry. We give the floor a reason to fail. The humans spent 3 days letting us laugh at them, so that today, when it mattered, we would do exactly one thing for them. Nothing. We would do nothing, and trust them, and live." She let out a long breath. "I called them a hiding fortress. We all did, pilot. I know. That is what makes it worse." The swarm was at half strength now, then a third, then less. And then the Reavers did the one thing the humans had been waiting for, the thing Doss Mercer had known they would eventually do, because every cornered tide does it when it finally understands the rules have changed. They tried to turn around. The surviving Reaver hulls, perhaps 4,000 of them, broke off their charge and tried to flee back into the dark. And this was the moment the entire engagement had been built toward, though no one in the Accord understood it yet. Because the floor did not only punish things that flew into it too fast, the floor punished any change in motion that was too sudden. And a swarm of terrified small ships, all reversing thrust at the same instant, was the most sudden change in motion the projector had ever been offered. "They are running, Captain," Auber said. 4,000, breaking for the dark." Doss Mercer watched them go, and for one long moment, Tolune, on the far channel, thought the humans would let them. Mercy, she thought. The slow ship will let the broken swarm flee, because it has already won, because it has nothing left to prove. She was wrong. She did not yet understand what the patient anvil was for. "Reshape the floor," Mercer said, and his quiet voice had changed, just slightly, into something older and harder. "Wrap the aperture. Close the back door. They came here to erase a column of starving colonists' grain. They do not get to leave and come back next year for the seedlings." This was the part the humans never spoke of in the mess hall. The patient anvil was not a shield. A shield lets the enemy retreat. The anvil was a verdict, and a verdict does not adjourn because the guilty party has reconsidered. 41 years of being mocked at the front of 6 prior columns had taught its crew one lesson above all others, and the lesson was this. You only get to be underestimated once per enemy, so when the enemy finally understood, you made sure there was no enemy left to carry the understanding home. The aperture of the projector widened, and the floor curled, and the dark side of the system folded shut like a closing hand. The 4,000 fleeing Reavers hit the closed back door at the worst possible speed, which was the speed of panic, and the dark side of the system bloomed with the silent grinding of metal that had tried to outrun a thing no one had ever needed to outrun before. Tolune turned off the audio feed from her own sensor station because she could not bear the soft sounds it was inventing to represent the deaths of 4,000 crews. She was not sentimental about Reavers. The Reavers would have killed every soul in the column and laughed the thin, clicking laugh she herself had laughed 3 days ago. But there is a difference between knowing an enemy deserves an ending and watching the ending arrive with the patience of a stone, and that difference was teaching Esh something about the humans that she would carry home and never quite be able to explain to anyone who had not seen it. "They are not angry," she said aloud, to no one. Drovo heard her on the private channel. "What?" "The humans. Watch their reactor. Watch how they shoot. There is no anger in it. We fight angry. All of us. The Accord, the Reavers, everyone. We scream, and we burn, and we pour ourselves into the fight because we are afraid. The humans are not afraid, and they are not angry. They are just..." She searched for the word in her own language and could not find it. "They are just finishing. Like closing a door. Like wiping a table." "That is worse," Drovo said quietly. "That is so much worse than anger." On the bridge of the patient anvil, the count of living Reaver hulls fell below 1,000, and Captain Mercer was already thinking about the part of the engagement that frightened him, which was not the swarm. He had killed swarms before. The anvil had been built to kill swarms, and a swarm, for all its terror, was a simple problem. It came fast and it died fast, and the only question was whether you had the patience to stand still and let it. What frightened Doss Mercer was the thing his own censor pit had just flagged at the very edge of the plot, far behind the dying swarm, in the deep dark where the reavers bred. "Captain," Oren Vale's voice came up the line, and for the first time in the engagement, the boy's voice was not quite steady, and Mercer respected him more for it, not less. "There is a second contact. Behind the swarm. Big. Really big. It is not a reaver. It is the thing the reavers come out of. The Koran reavers did not build their swarms in shipyards. They grew them in mother hulls, vast slow hive vessels each the size of a small moon, that drifted in the dark and bled out thousands of small ugly hulls the way a corpse bleeds out flies. No one in the Bright Reach had ever seen a Koran mother hull and lived, because a mother hull never traveled alone. It traveled behind 12,000 of its children, and by the time you were close enough to see the mother, the children had already finished you." Oren had it on his plot now. A single object, 4 kilometers along its longest axis, slow and dark and patient, hanging in the deep behind the wreckage of its swarm. It had come to watch its children harvest the column. It was now watching its children die against a wall of warped distance, and it was beginning, ponderously, to turn away. "It is going to run," Auber said, reading the same plot. "A mother hull. 4 kilometers. It is going to run and breed another swarm and come back, Captain. They always come back. That is the whole shape of them." Doss Mercer looked at the great dark shape on his screen, the source of the tide, the thing that had sent 12,000 of its own children to die on a grain run, because grain runs were easy, and the reavers had never met a wall before. He thought about the 3 starving colonies on the rim. He thought about next year, and the year after, and the seedlings, and the children of the colonists who would look up at the dark and not know that a moon-sized horror was deciding whether they were worth another harvest. "How long to range the floor on something that size?" Mercer asked. Auber's hands moved. "It is far, Captain, and it is huge. To fold something 4 kilometers long, we would have to drop the floor we are holding, recharge to full, and re-aim. That is 90 seconds of full charge. During those 90 seconds we cannot stop the last of the swarm, and we cannot defend the column, and we are a stationary target with our weapon offline." It was, Eshtolune realized as she listened in on the Allied channel, the first genuine risk the patient Anvil had taken in the entire engagement. For 90 seconds the slow ship would be exactly as defenseless as it had pretended to be for 3 days, and in those 90 seconds, the last few hundred reavers, freed from the floor, could tear into the freighters and the escort fleet unopposed. She understood, then, why the humans had told them to get behind the anvil and do nothing. Not because the Accord ships were useless, because the Accord ships were the answer to exactly this moment. She keyed the channel before her courage could fail her. "Patient Anvil," she said, "this is the Quill of Vaccine. Drop your floor, kill the mother hull. We will hold the last of the swarm off you for your 90 seconds. She swallowed. "Let the cripples cover the fortress for once." There was a pause on the line. Then Doss Mercer's own voice answered her directly, the first time the human captain had spoken to her in 3 days, and it was warm in a way she had not expected. "Quartermaster Pilot," Mercer said, "I was hoping you would offer, thank you. Hold them for 90 seconds, and the reavers will never grow another swarm in this sky. Anvil out." Esh turned to her fleet, 240 ships that had spent 3 days laughing, and 1 terrible hour learning, and she gave the order of her life. "All escorts, this is Quill of Vaccine, acting on the human captain's plan. The slow ship is dropping its weapon to kill the mother of the swarm. For 90 seconds, it cannot protect itself, or us. For 90 seconds, we are the wall. Form on me. Fast ships, do what we were built to do. Get between the reavers and the anvil, and do not let one hull through. We were fast our whole lives so that we could be fast right now. Go." There was a silence on the escort net after she finished. The silence of 240 captains deciding, all at once, whether to trust the slow gray ship with their lives. It did not last long. The young hothead Velo, who had run the cruel wager about how far behind the anvil would fall, came onto the net first, and his voice had none of the laughter left in it. "Quill of Vaccine, this is Velo," he said. "I called that ship a slow-moving monument. I want that on the record before I die, because I want it on the record that I was wrong, and that I flew into the wall anyway to give it 90 seconds. Forming on you. Tell me where to stand. One after another, the others followed. The whole bright fast fleet that had laughed for 11 days, and there was no laughter in any of them now. Only the hard, clean focus of pilots who had finally found a fight that speed could win. Talune positioned them with the care of someone who knew exactly how much 90 seconds was worth. Because she flew a ship that measured battles in seconds, and she put the fastest hulls at the widest angles, where only speed could close the gaps, and she put herself at the very center of the line, directly between the broken swarm and the slow gray ship that had carried all their contempt and was about to spend it saving them. And the Accord fleet, lean and bright and built to dance, finally danced. 240 ships that could not have stood against the swarm in a straight fight did not need to stand against the swarm in a straight fight. They needed to hold a line for 90 seconds against a few hundred scattered, broken, terrified reavers, and that was a fight speed could win. They poured between the patient anvil and the last of the tide, and they wove a net of fire so fast and so tight that no reaver hull found a gap, and for 90 seconds, the cripples covered the fortress, and not one enemy ship reached the slow gray slab holding its breath at the center. It was, the surviving captains would all agree afterward, the finest flying of their lives. Not because it was the hardest fight. It was not the hardest fight. The reavers in front of them were broken and panicked and few. It was the finest flying of their lives because, for the first time, the speed they had worshipped their whole lives was being spent in service of something slower than themselves, and that turned out to feel completely different from spending it to save your own skin. Inside those 90 seconds, time stretched the way it does for fast people doing slow work. Talune had flown 100 engagements, and every one of them had been measured in fractions of a second, in the time it took a fast ship to cross a kill box and be gone. This was different. This was 90 whole seconds of holding still in the way that mattered, of being the wall instead of the blade, and she discovered that it was the hardest thing she had ever asked her body to do. Every instinct she owned screamed at her to move, to burn, to use her speed to escape the danger instead of standing in front of it. She ignored every instinct, and so did 239 other captains, and that, she understood later, was the real gift the humans had given the Reach that day. Not the kill. Anyone could be taught to kill. The humans had taught them, for 90 seconds, how to stand. A reaver hull broke through a seam in the line near Velo's wing. A single ugly 40-meter wedge that had found a half-second of open space and burned for the slow gray ship behind the wall, with the last of its hate. It had a clean run. For one heartbeat, it had a clean run straight at the defenseless flank of the patient anvil, and Esh saw it, and knew she was too far to stop it, and felt the whole victory tilt on the edge of that single hull. Velo caught it. He should not have been able to. He was already turning the wrong way, already committed to another threat, and the geometry said he could not bring his ship around in time. But Velo had spent his whole life worshipping speed, and for the first time in his life, he had a reason to spend all of it at once that was bigger than his own survival, and he found, in that reason, a fraction of a second the geometry had not known he had. He rolled his raider across the reaver's path and took the ram lance meant for the anvil through his own forward hull, and his ship spun away crippled and venting, and the reaver, deflected, tumbled off into the dark where the cooling wreckage of its swarm was already drifting. Anvil flank is clear, Velo said over the net, through what sounded like a great deal of pain. Nothing got through. Tell the slow ship I said it is welcome. And then, after a pause, with the ghost of his old swagger, and tell it I am revising my wager. I no longer believe it is a slow-moving monument to anything. Quill, where do you need me? I can still fly. Mostly. Eshish laughed, a real laugh. Nothing like the thin, clicking thing she had laughed 3 days ago, and she put Velo's crippled ship at the safest point on the line and let him hold it, because a man who took a ram lance for the fortress had earned the right to finish the fight standing up. On the patient anvil, the floor went dark. The hum that had filled every tooth aboard for 2 minutes faded, and the ship was, for the first time, genuinely vulnerable. A stationary 300-meter target with its only weapon offline and 90 seconds of recharge between it and survival. The crew did not panic. They had a navigator named Lynn Auber counting the recharge in a flat voice. and a sensor cadet named Oren Vale, calling the mother hull's slow turn, and a chief named Petra Holland, standing behind the cadet with one hand on his shoulder, and a captain named Doss Mercer, watching the great dark shape in the deep, and waiting, with 41 years of patience, for the moment it could not escape. "Recharge at 40%, Auber said. "Mother hull is committing to its turn. It will be beam on to us in 60 seconds. "It thinks it is running," Mercer said. "It is showing us its flank. Good. Let it run. The faster it commits to the turn, the more momentum it gives us." He almost smiled. They never learn, none of them. They have spent 10,000 years teaching each other that speed is the answer, and they cannot stop teaching it even as it kills them. "Recharge at 70%, Auber said. "The Accord is holding the line. Not one hull through. Oren, talk to me about the mother." "She is at full burn now, Chief, trying to clear the system," Oren reported. His voice had found its steadiness again, because the chief's hand was steady on his shoulder, and the captain's voice was calm, and the whole ship was calm. And calm, Oren was learning, was the deadliest thing a human warship carried. "She is 4 kilometers of slow, but she is accelerating hard. Vector is clean. She is running in a straight line, Chief. A straight, fast line." Petra Holland smiled the smile that was not kind. A straight, fast line. After everything she just watched, they really cannot help it. "Recharge at 100%, Lynn Auber said. "Floor at full charge. Aperture ranged on the mother hull. We have her, Captain." Doss Mercer looked at the 4-kilometer shape fleeing into the dark at full burn, the mother of 12,000 killers, the source of the tide, the thing that had decided 3 starving colonies were an easy harvest. He thought of the seedlings. He thought of the children who would look up at a sky that no longer had a monster in it and never know why. "Raise the floor," he said, for the second and last time, all the way. The aperture of the projector widened, and the floor curled, and somewhere in the deep, the mother hull ran straight and hard for an edge of the system it was never going to reach. 4 kilometers of patient horror that had birthed 12,000 killers and had never once, in all its long life, met the single thing in the galaxy that punished a thing for running fast in a straight line. The floor rose under the mother hull at the exact moment its 4 kilometers of mass were committed to a straight, fast line, and the largest living thing the Corin Reavers had ever grown discovered, in the last second of its existence, the same lesson its children had died learning. Speed was not an answer. Speed had never been an answer. Speed was only the measure of how much the floor had to work with, and the mother hull, fleeing at full burn, had given the projector more to work with than anything the patient anvil had folded in 41 years. There was no explosion that Talune could see. That was the part she could never make anyone understand afterward. A 4-kilometer horror that had birthed 12,000 killers did not die in fire. It died in geometry. The shear took its straight, fast line and folded the line, and the mother hull's own momentum did the rest, wrenching the vast hull against itself, until the structure that had held it together for 1,000 years simply stopped being able to. It came apart slowly, the way a mountain comes apart, in long grinding sections that drifted away from each other into the dark, and the swarm that would have been born from it next year, and the year after, and the year after that, died with it, unborn, in the cold. Then the dark side of the system was quiet. Oren Vale stared at his plot, where 12,001 contacts had been, and where now there was only drifting wreckage and the slow cooling of metal, and he found that he could not speak. Petra Holland's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Breathe, Oren," she said quietly. "You did your job. You found them 11 minutes out. Everyone in this column is alive because a 19-year-old distrusted a smear that was too even. Breathe." He breathed. His hands were shaking now, finally, because the job was done and the steadiness was no longer needed, and that was allowed. Holland let him shake. "How many did we lose, Chief?" he asked. "Of ours?" "None," Holland said. "Not one human. Not one Accord ship. Not one grain freighter." She looked at the wreckage on the plot, 12,000 hulls and a moon-sized mother, and her voice was very even. "They came here to erase a column of starving colonists, and they did not take a single soul with them. That is what the slow ship is for, Oren. That is the whole reason it crawls. It is not slow because it cannot be fast. It is slow because it does not need to be." On the bridge, Captain Doss Mercer let out a breath that no one heard, and folded his hands behind his back, and watched the dark go quiet, and did not smile, because he never smiled at this part. He had killed swarms before, and he would kill them again, and somewhere in the deep there were other mother hulls and other tides, and a man who smiled at the killing started to need it. Mercer did not need it. He only needed the column to reach the rim, and the colonies to plant their seedlings, and the children to look up at a sky with one fewer monster in it. That was enough. It had always been enough. "Lin," he said, "stand the floor down. Bring us about. Match the column's speed, best we can." He almost let himself sound tired. "The bread is getting cold." Lin Auber actually laughed, a short startled bark, and the bridge of the patient anvil broke into the low, ragged laughter of people who have just lived through something and are realizing, all at once, that they get to keep living. It was the first laughter the anvil's bridge had allowed itself, and it was nothing like the thin, clicking laughter of the Accord. It was warm and exhausted, and a little disbelieving, and Talune, who had patched into the human bridge channel without quite meaning to, heard it, and understood that she had spent 3 days laughing at the wrong people. She keyed the open channel. Every ship in the column could hear her. She wanted every ship in the column to hear her. "Patient Anvil," Esh said. "This is Quartermaster Pilot Talune, of the Quill of Vaccine. 3 days ago, I called you a fortress that walks. I called you a frightened joke hiding behind the bread. I said your secret weapon was disappointment, that you arrived so slowly the enemy would die of old age." Her voice caught, just slightly. "I was almost right. The enemy did die waiting for you to matter. I just did not understand that you had planned for them to." There was a pause. Then Doss Mercer's warm, unhurried voice filled the channel, and there was something in it that might have been the ghost of amusement. "Quartermaster Pilot," he said, "on behalf of the patient Anvil, I accept your apology, and I want you to know, it is the kindest thing anyone has said about us in 41 years. Most allies never apologize. Most allies just go very quiet, the way a sound goes quiet when a door closes. A breath. You did something better than apologize. When it mattered, you trusted us, and then you covered us. 240 ships held a wall, so a slow old monitor could do its work. There is no version of today where the colonies eat without you. Remember that part. Forget the laughing, keep the wall." Esh did not trust herself to answer. "On the private channel," Drovo said, very quietly, "I am going to think about that for the rest of my life. The way a sound goes quiet when a door closes." "So am I," Esh said. The relief column reformed in the cooling dark, 240 Accord escorts, and a long train of grain freighters, and one slow gray monitor that took up its old position at the back, behind the bread, exactly where it had been for 3 days. Only now no one laughed at it. Now, when the escort captains looked at the patient anvil on their plots, they felt the particular cold that Esh had felt on the very first day, the cold of standing near a stone that does not care about insects, except now, they understood the cold, and they were grateful for it, because the stone was on their side. The column reached the rim 11 days later, slowed to the anvil's pace the entire way, and not one captain complained about the speed. The 3 colonies on the rim had been 3 days from cutting their last rations in half when the freighters arrived. There were 9,000 colonists across the 3 worlds, farmers and miners and the children of farmers and miners, and they did not know about the swarm, and they did not know about the mother hull, and they did not know that a 19-year-old censor cadet on a ship they had never heard of had distrusted a smear that was too even and bought them all 11 minutes that turned into the rest of their lives. They only knew that the grain had come, and the water had come, and they would plant the seedlings after all. A delegation came up to the column to thank the escort fleet. They thanked the fast, bright Accord ships, the ones they could see, the ones that looked like warships were supposed to look. They almost did not thank the slow gray slab at the back, because it did not look like a warship at all, and an old colonist who led the delegation actually asked Talune, on an open channel, why the Accord had wasted a place in the formation on a freighter painted gray. And Talune, quartermaster pilot of the Quill of Vaccine, who had laughed at exactly that ship 3 days before the battle, did not laugh now. She told the old colonist the truth, slowly and carefully, because she wanted to get it right. "That is not a freighter," she said. "That is the patient anvil. 12,000 Corin reavers came to erase your grain, and your water, and your seedlings, and your children, and they came so fast that nothing in the bright reach could have stopped them. Nothing except a ship slow enough to stand still and wait for them to arrive too fast to stop. Your children are alive because the deadliest warship any of us have ever seen looks like a freighter painted gray, and crawls, and lets everyone laugh at it, right up until the moment it decides not to be laughed at anymore. She paused. Wave at it when you pass. It will not wave back. It does not need to. The old colonist was quiet for a long time. Then he asked the question Esh had known he would ask, the question everyone asked once they understood. Why does it let itself be mocked? If it is the deadliest ship any of you have seen, why does it crawl at the back and let an entire fleet call it a coward for 3 days? It could announce itself. It could make us all afraid the moment it arrived. Why does it choose to be a joke? And here Esh repeated the thing she had heard Petra Holland say on the Human Bridge channel, the thing she had asked the humans about during the long 11 days to the rim, the thing she now believed was the truest sentence she had ever learned. Because you only get to be underestimated once per enemy, she said. The humans figured that out a long time ago. A ship that announces how dangerous it is gets fought carefully, at range, by an enemy who respects it. A ship that lets itself be called a joke gets charged, fast and stupid and full of contempt, by an enemy who thinks it is easy. The Reavers worshipped speed. They thought speed was always the answer. So the humans built a ship that looks slow and harmless and beneath worry, and they painted it gray, and they let it crawl, and they waited for an enemy arrogant enough to fly into it at full burn. She let out a long breath. We were that arrogant. Once. For 3 days. We just had the good fortune to be on its side. The colony delegation went home to plant the seedlings. The grain was unloaded. The water was unloaded. And the relief column turned around to make the long, slow journey back to the heart of the bright reach, at the speed of one gray monitor that took up its old position at the back of the formation and ran its reactor at a low, even, bottomless hum that never spiked. The children of the rim colonies came out to watch the column leave. That was a thing colonists did, on worlds where a supply column was the rarest and most precious visitor a year could bring. They climbed the low hills outside their settlements, and they pointed at the fast, bright Accord ships as they peeled up out of the atmosphere, because the fast, bright ships were the ones that looked like something out of a story, lean and gleaming and quick. And then, last of all, slow and patient and gray, the patient anvil lifted, and most of the children did not point at it at all, because it did not look like anything out of a story. It looked like a brick. It looked like a piece of the hillside that had decided to float. But there was one child, the granddaughter of the old colonist, who had asked Esh why the Accord had wasted a place on a freighter painted gray, and she had heard her grandfather tell the story that Esh had told him, and she watched the slow gray brick climb into the sky, long after the fast, bright ships were gone, and she did point at it, and she said to her grandfather, in the way that children say the truest things without knowing they are true, "That one is the strongest, isn't it? The slow one. That's why it's last. Because it doesn't have to hurry. Nothing can make it hurry." The old colonist looked at the slow gray ship climbing into the dark, and he thought about 12,000 killers, and a moon-sized mother, and a wall that only killed the things that ran at it, and he put his hand on his granddaughter's shoulder, and he said, "Yes. That is exactly right. That is exactly what it is." And he made a private decision, which he kept, that the children of his colony would grow up knowing the name of the slow ship, so that no child of the rim would ever again look at a patient gray brick at the back of a formation and laugh, the way a quartermaster pilot named Esh Talun had once laughed, before she learned. The journey home took the column 11 days, exactly as long as the journey out, because the column moved at the speed of the slowest ship in it, and the slowest ship in it was the deadliest thing any of them had ever seen. No one minded the speed. That was the strangest part, and Esh wrote about it in her report. 11 days out, the slow ship had been a joke, a drag on the formation, a thing to be mocked. 11 days back, the very same ship at the very same speed was something the whole column arranged itself around with a kind of unspoken reverence, slowing without complaint, holding station off its flanks, watching it the way you watch a sleeping thing you are very glad is on your side. Nothing about the ship had changed, only what they knew about it had changed, and Esh understood, watching it crawl, that this was the whole secret of the patient anvil in a single image. It had always been exactly what it was. The only thing that ever changed was the moment the galaxy finally looked. On the last night before the column split to its home ports, Talun did something no Accord captain had done in living memory. She requested permission to dock with the human warship, and she crossed over, alone, in a small shuttle, to stand on the bridge of the ship she had mocked. It was not what she expected. The bridge of the patient anvil was small and worn and quiet, lined with gray panels that had been patched and repatched for 41 years, and it did not look like the bridge of the deadliest warship in the sector. It looked like the inside of a tired old tool that had been used carefully for a very long time. The crew were unremarkable. The captain, Doss Mercer, was an unremarkable gray-haired man who shook her hand with an unremarkable grip and offered her something warm to drink that she could not identify and did not refuse. She met the boy too, the censor cadet, Orin Vale, 19 years old, who had found the swarm 11 minutes out. He was thin and young and a little shy, and he did not look like someone who had saved 9,000 colonists and 240 ships, and his own crew. And when told him so, he flushed and looked at the deck and said it was the chief who had taught him to distrust the smear that was too even, and the captain who had acted on it, and that he had only read a screen. "You read it 11 minutes early," said. "On my ship, 11 minutes is a battle won or lost. The humans must train very good sensor operators." "The humans?" said Petra Holland, coming up behind the boy with a fresh cup of the warm thing. "Train very patient ones. That is the whole secret of this ship, quartermaster pilot. There is no secret weapon. There is no trick. The projector is just physics. Anyone could build it. The hard part is not the gun." She handed the cup. "The hard part is being willing to crawl. Being willing to take up the worst position in the formation, behind the bread, and let an entire allied fleet call you a coward for 3 days, and not say one word in your own defense, and just wait. Most species cannot do it. Their pride will not let them. They have to announce themselves. They have to be feared on arrival." She smiled, and it was the smile that was not kind, but it was not unkind either, not now. "Humans are very, very good at being underestimated. We have had a lot of practice. The whole galaxy spent a long time deciding we were slow and soft and beneath worry. We decided to let them keep thinking it. It is the best armor we have ever built, and it does not weigh anything, and it never runs out." Talun drank the warm thing, which was bitter and strange and somehow exactly right, and she looked around the small worn bridge of the deadliest warship she had ever seen, and she understood, finally and completely, the thing she had been circling since the first day. The patient anvil was not slow because it was weak. It was slow because being thought weak was a weapon, and the humans had learned to wield it better than any cannon. Every species in the Bright Reach had spent 10,000 years building faster engines to run from the things that hunted them. The humans had spent that same time learning to stand still, and crawl, and be laughed at, and wait, patient as a stone, for the galaxy to fly into them at full burn. Asked one more question before she left the worn gray bridge, because she had carried it the whole 11 days home in her head, and she did not want to fly back to the Reach without an answer. She asked the captain how many times the patient anvil had done this, how many swarms, how many mother hulls, how many fleets had laughed at it, and then gone silent, the way a sound goes silent when a door closes. Doss Mercer thought about it for a while. He was not being evasive. He genuinely seemed to be counting. "The ship is 41 years old," he said at last. "I have had her for 19 of those years. In my time, 11 major actions, and a handful of smaller ones I would not bore you with. Before me there were 2 other captains, and the records say between them they fought maybe 30, so call it 40 engagements, give or take." He looked at her steadily. "In every single one of them, quartermaster pilot, somebody mocked us first. Every time. 40 fleets, 40 allies or 40 enemies, and not one of them looked at this slow gray ship and felt afraid. That is not an accident. That is the whole design. The day a fleet looks at the anvil and feels afraid is the day the anvil has failed, because fear makes them careful, and careful is the one thing the floor cannot kill. So we build the ship to be laughed at. We paint her gray, we make her crawl, and we send her out to be the joke at the back of the formation, over and over, for 41 years. because the joke is the deadliest weapon she carries, and a joke only works on someone who has not heard it before. Esh thought about that all the way home. She thought about it as the column split at the inner buoys, the fast, bright ships peeling off to their home ports, the slow gray monitor turning toward whatever cold corner of the dark needed a joke next. She thought about a galaxy full of creatures who had spent 10,000 years building faster engines to run from their fears, and one species that had looked at all that speed and quietly asked the only question no one else had thought to ask, and built the answer, and then hidden the answer inside a ship so slow and so plain that the whole galaxy agreed to ignore it. Her report ran to 400 pages. The Senate of the Accord read it in a single sitting, which had not happened in living memory, and then they read it again. They did not change their warships overnight, because 10,000 years of religion does not bend in a season, and the engineers of the Reach still woke every morning asking how to go faster, because that was who they were. But a sentence began to circulate among the younger officers, passed from bridge to bridge, the way the best and most dangerous ideas always travel, quietly, between people who are not supposed to be having them. The sentence was this: speed is not the only answer. There is a ship out there that proves it. It is gray, and it is slow, and it is the deadliest thing any of us have ever seen, and the only reason we did not know that is that it let us laugh. There were officers in the Reach, older ones, admirals with thin clicking laughs of their own, who did not like that sentence at all. They said it was dangerous. They said it would make young pilots reckless, make them think slow was strong, make them forget that for 10,000 years, speed had been the only thing standing between the bright Reach and the dark, and they were not entirely wrong. Speed had kept the Reach alive for a very long time. But Esh Talune, who had watched 12,000 killers and a moon-sized mother fly into a wall they refused to believe in, had learned something the old admirals had not, and she put it in her report in plain words, so that no one could pretend to misunderstand it. The Reavers were fast too, she wrote. The Reavers were the fastest thing any of us had ever feared, and speed did not save them. Speed killed them, every last one, 12,000 hulls and the mother that grew them, because they met the one enemy in the galaxy who had stopped asking how to go faster and started asking what beats speed. We should be very glad that enemy is our ally. We should be even more glad we will never have to find out what the floor does to a fleet of ours. That last line was struck from the public version of the report by a nervous Senate clerk, but Esh kept it in the copy she filed in her own ship's log, where it stayed, and where her successors read it, and where it did exactly the quiet work she had intended. She flew home the next day, she filed her report, and it was read at the highest levels of the Accord, and it changed how the Bright Reach thought about warships forever, though that is a longer story. But the part of the report that Esh Talune cared about most, the part she insisted be entered word for word into the permanent record, so that no child of the Reach would ever again laugh at a slow gray ship at the back of a formation, was the last line. She wrote it the way Doss Mercer had said it to her, on the open channel, with the whole column listening. Everyone mocked the slow human warship, every single one of us. We called it a fortress that walks, and a frightened joke hiding behind the bread. And then 12,000 killers flew into it at full burn, and it did not move, and it did not flinch. And when the dark went quiet, it was the only thing still standing, the deadliest of all of us, exactly as it had been the entire time, waiting for the rest of us to notice. Esh Talune signed the report, and she never laughed at a slow ship again, and on the anniversary of that day, every year, for the rest of her long life, she sat at her station on the Quill of Vicine and watched the empty dark and thought about the way a sound goes quiet when a door closes. And far away, at the back of some other formation, behind some other cargo, the patient anvil crawled on, gray and patient, and beneath worry, running its reactor at a low, even hum that never spiked, letting some other fleet laugh, waiting, as it had waited for 41 years, and would wait for 41 more, for an enemy arrogant enough to come too fast to stop. It never had to wait long. The galaxy was full of things that worshipped speed, and the floor was always charged.